Hello. I want to talk about a couple different things. I'm going to talk about Hezbollah and a bunch of different stuff regarding Syria and Israel and Iran and the US. So what prompted me to kind of make this video was, one, I just finished university, so glad to be done that, and I kind of want to continue on my trains of thought. And also I saw some report on Roya News saying that there's apparently reports that Hezbollah is going to reactivate its what's apparently called their martyr squads, like shock troops, I suppose. But before I get into that, I kind of want to get into the philosophy, more or less, of Hezbollah and specifically their martyr squads. But I do just want to go over the conflict kind of in general before I do that. And from that, obviously, Hezbollah 82 formed as a direct consequence of Israeli incursion and invasion into southern Lebanon. And, well, why? Why did Israel even invade Lebanon then? Well, I'll try and get into it. I'm going to go over the history of Israel and kind of the couple decades leading up to it first, and then I will try and get into the Hezbollah martyr stuff. So to begin, this paper is that I'm going to read first is just regarding specifically the UN and kind of failures from the UN regarding Israel. But so I'll just start. The relationship between the UN and the state of Israel is the most contentious in the history of the post-war international system. And this paper is just going to argue basically that the UN has failed to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict, and it's not merely a result of institutional inefficiency, it's structural consequences of the post-World War II order, particularly the interests of the powerful, like the United States, and how they have continually overridden the organization's founding principles of universal rights and international law. And to do that, I'm going to start back with Herschel, of course, or Herzl. So modern political Zionism emerged in the late 19th century Europe, obviously as a direct response to widespread and historic anti-Semitism. If you've taken any European history courses, particularly, I guess, Germany, anti-Semitism was rife, for sure. So, political Zionism's father, Theodor Herzl, was radicalized by the Dreyfus Affair in France, and he argued that Jewish safety and self-determination could only be achieved through the establishment of a sovereign homeland for the Jewish people, preferably in the historic land of Palestine, or the land of Israel, as they called it. So this project was going to require the patronage of a great power, of course, which it found in the British Empire during World War I. And now during World War I, there was the Arab Revolt, and the Ottomans are occupying all of this territory, and the Arabs are fighting against the Ottomans alongside the Allies. But these Arabs are probably thinking, geez, we really want our own state. Hejaz, 6 days, obviously that didn't really go well. So, 1917 Balfour Declaration, short letter from the British Foreign Secretary to the Zionist Federation, and basically it just said, yep, we're going to support you in your fight or, drive to create a national home. Now, the Balfour Declaration was not saying that the Brits would help create a Jewish state, but rather a homeland, a national home. So at the time, the Jewish population of Palestine was roughly 10%, while the Arab population obviously over 90, or around 90. And this promise made by the Brits was made without the consent of that indigenous majority. And that set the stage for a century of conflict. After the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the League of Nations, UN predecessor, granted Britain the mandate for Palestine. The mandate system was ostensibly a sacred trust to guide the territories towards their future independence. However, the British mandate was unique. Britain was responsible for implementing the Balfour Declaration to secure the establishment of the Jewish national home. For 3 decades, Britain was caught in contradiction, legally bound to facilitate Jewish immigration, while governing an Arab population which had fought for its independence, and who saw this influx as an existential threat. And this led to cycles of violence, riots in 1920-21, full-scale Arab revolt in 1936 to 1939, and even before that. And the British would seek to quell this violence, right? Issuing a white paper in May 1939 that sought to restrict Jewish immigration. And presenting the policy, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, Malcolm MacDonald, articulated the core of the problem with a clarity that is perfectly reflected today. He said, "The Arabs were not thinking of material things at all. They were thinking of their freedom. They were afraid that if Jewish immigration continued indefinitely, this energetic, clever, wealthy incoming people would dominate them numerically, economically, politically, and in every way in the land of their birth. I do not need to tell the rest of the story. For 3 decades, there has been a grimly sustained revolt. It has produced a hatred between the Arabs and the Jews in Palestine, which, if it were to become permanent, would be disastrous to people who have to live side by side in the same land. It has spread mistrust and unrest in the neighboring countries, so that it threatens to become a permanent source of friction and strife throughout the Near and Middle East." So Malcolm identified the central unresolved dynamic, the fear of demographic and political domination. He made it clear that this conflict would not remain localized, but would spread mistrust and unrest, and had indeed already done so. And this was in 1939. When the UN inherited the crisis in 1947, this warning had been totally forgotten or ignored, and much had changed, obviously. The UN's first major action regarding Palestine was Resolution 181, the Partition Plan, and called for the creation of 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab, with Jerusalem under international control. And obviously, the Jewish leadership accepted the plan, but the Arab leadership rejected it, obviously with the context of that quote from MacDonald. And on May 14th, 1948, Ben Gurion declared the independence of the State of Israel. And the following day, 5 Arab armies invaded. So in 1948, that war resulted in Israel controlling the majority of Mandatory Palestine, including Western Jerusalem. Over 700,000 Palestinians were expelled or fled their homes, and the Palestinian Arab state envisioned by the UN never came into existence. The UN's response was Resolution 194, which stated that Palestinian refugees, the right of return, should be permitted to return to their homes. Israel refused, and the resolution has never been enforced, and continues to not be enforced. Following the 48 War, 1956, Suez Crisis. And this is a big point in the broader geopolitical sphere right now. Even though these things have happened in the past, history still has an impact on today. So, 1956, Suez Crisis saw Israel, Britain, and France collude to invade Egypt after President Nasser nationalized the Suez. And the U.S. and the Soviet Union forced a withdrawal, and the UN placed peacekeepers in the Sinai. The superpowers, not the UN, dictated the outcome. The fragility of this arrangement was obviously shown in 1967. Nasser requested the withdrawal of the peacekeepers. Secretary General complied immediately. Nasser then closed the Strait of Tiran and to Israeli shipping, and on June 5th, 1967, Israel launched a preemptive strike, destroying the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. And in 6 days, Israel captured the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights from Syria. The occupation of the Palestinian territories really began now. And the UN Security Council responded with Resolution 242, which called for the withdrawal of Israeli armed forces from territories occupied in the recent conflict in exchange for termination of all claims or states of belligerency. That deliberate ambiguity of the phrase "from territories," not "from the territories," has been exploited by Israel to justify their permanent occupation and expansion of such. And that resolution obviously has never been enforced. Following 67, there was 1973 Yom Kippur War, saw Egypt and Syria launch a surprise attack. And this was obviously to regain that territory that was lost in the 67 war. And this is when the modern dynamic kind of comes into being between Israel and the U.S. Israel only survived through a massive U.S. military airlift, Operation Nickelgrass, and this event cemented the U.S.-Israeli strategic alliance. And from that point on, the U.S. acted and continues to act as Israel's primary diplomatic shield, military supplier, economic benefactor, and it acts to fundamentally distort, maybe even destroy the UN's ability to function as anything resembling a neutral arbiter. A few years later, in 78, Israel invaded Lebanon for the first time. And this prompted Resolution 425 and 426, which called for the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Lebanon and created UNIFIL, the UN interim force in Lebanon. And they were tasked with monitoring the withdrawal in addition to peace and security for 6 months. But it could be extended if seen as necessary, and obviously they're still going. So it's been necessary. 1982, Israel launched Operation Peace for Galilee, a full-scale invasion of Lebanon, and this prompted the creation of Hezbollah. The stated goal was to push Palestinian militant groups away from the border, but the actual objective, as articulated by the Defense Minister Ariel Sharon, was to destroy the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, as a political and military force, and to install a pro-Israeli Christian government in Lebanon. And with Lebanon, I don't really want to get into it when I'm going over Hezbollah specifically, but Lebanon is a very divided country in terms of religion and ideas, and that goes into geography as well between Christians and Muslims. But anyway, so there were massacres committed during the war, and the UN Security Council condemned them, and the General Assembly declared it an act of genocide, but there was no intervention. The UN interim force in Lebanon, present since 1978, stood by doing nothing. And this episode demonstrated the UN's fundamental inability to protect civilians when confronted with a state willing to act with impunity. Now, 1979, here we go. 1979, the Iranian Revolution transformed the entire regional landscape. And to understand that, obviously, we have to look at the 53 coup. So in 51, Iran democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, and his goals had always been to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian oil company. And in response to that, the CIA and MI6 orchestrated Operation Ajax and overthrew Mossadegh and reinstalled the Shah, Pahlavi. And Shah, obviously a close ally of the US and informally of Israel, ruled for 26 years. And he was propped up by American support. So in 79, the revolution overthrew the Shah was in part a direct backlash against this Western interference. I mean, depending on how you look at it, it was 100% because of that. And the new theocratic regime led by Khomeini broke with Israel and really did embrace the Palestinian cause. And the revolution demonstrated the long-term catastrophic consequences of Western intervention for their short-term strategic gain. And those consequences the UN was powerless to predict or prevent. It replaced a pro-Western ally with a theocratic state whose ideology was built on opposition to both American hegemony and the existence of Israel. And that just set the stage for what we're seeing now. And regarding Israel and Iran, a central element of the international community's failure is the double standard applied to nuclear non-proliferation. Israel is widely estimated to possess at least dozens of nuclear warheads. I've seen like 200, 400, whatever. But they have a lot of different delivery mechanisms. Israel is not a signatory to the Treaty of Non-Proliferation, and it has never opened its nuclear facilities at Dimona to inspection by the IAEA, and it maintains a policy of deliberate opacity. Iran, by contrast, is a signatory to the NPT. Its nuclear facilities are subject to IAEA inspections. The IAEA has repeatedly confirmed that while Iran has enriched uranium beyond civilian needs, it has not produced any weapons-grade material. There is no evidence it has made the political decision to pursue a nuclear weapon. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has stood before the UN and U.S. Congress and warned that Iran is weeks away from a nuke for 30 years. And it's just, that script is just designed to manufacture an enemy and existential evil to justify sanctions, assassination, cyber attacks, and now outright war. And the hypocrisy, punishing Iran for a weapon that it does not have or arguably even need, while ignoring the nuclear arsenal of Israel that it has possessed for over 50 years, is a primary reason, that the UN has been unable to build a credible non-proliferation agreement in the Middle East and indeed the world. And it's part of the reason that today the world is seemingly closer to the use of a nuclear weapon in anger than at any point in the post-war period. So that post-war period, nukes are now available, but we all saw, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're like, okay, let's not fucking use these. That's fucking insane. But now we're like, yeah, let's start using them. By the way, a lot of nuclear treaties and stuff do not mention dirty bombs or tactical nuclear weapons. So, it's gotten to the point now where Israel or Iran or anybody, I guess, really could use a tactical nuke. And if they are efficient enough, there might be no radiation to be detected. I know that the U.S. had like a 60-pound nuke, I think, and it up to maybe up to a 20 kilo. No way, it was a 20 kiloton, maybe 5 kiloton yield. I don't know. Whatever, back on topic. The 2006 Lebanon War was a turning point in the regional conflict, exposing both the limits of Israeli military power and the continued irrelevance of the UN's peacekeeping framework. The UN's role during the war was, once again, marginal. UNIFIL, which has been there since 1978, was present in southern Lebanon and obviously was powerless to prevent Hezbollah's military buildup or the subsequent Israeli bombardment. Security Council Resolution 1701, which ended the war, called for a ceasefire and the disarmament of all armed groups in Lebanon and the withdrawal of Israeli forces. But like so many resolutions before it, it was partially implemented. Israel withdrew and partially ignored. Hezbollah was not disarmed. The failure to restrict Israeli settlement expansion and to enforce Resolution 1701 allowed Hezbollah to rearm and set the stage for these future conflicts. In the period following the end of the 2006 war, tension obviously shifted to Gaza, where Hamas gained control in 2007, and Israel imposed a crippling blockade, which the UN and human rights organizations have described as collective punishment. And anybody with a brain would describe as collective punishment if you're not letting in colored pencils and coloring books, along with, medical supplies, you're a cunt. The result was a series of major military operations resulting in massive Palestinian civilian casualties and the destruction of civilian infrastructure, followed by UN condemnations, Israeli justifications, and no meaningful accountability. Regarding the 2006 war, you can read... We Were Caught Unprepared by Matt M. Matthews, I think, regarding that and kind of the Israeli failure. So the post-October 7th, 2023 war in Gaza represented a major escalation following the Hamas-led attacks that killed approximately 1,200 people and resulted in the taking of over 200 hostages. And Israel, as a consequence, launched a military campaign of unprecedented scale and intensity. I don't want to talk about Al-Aqsa flood. I could probably talk about that for hours and hours, and all the questions that I have specifically regarding the top-down explosive damage, pretty consistent with like an autocannon fired from an Apache helicopter on all of the cars at the music festival. It's very strange, and tanks firing into buildings, and yeah, I don't know who knows how many of their own civilians Israel killed on that day. But the death toll in Gaza is immense, and the demographic spread is fucked. Researchers estimated that the number of violent and non-violent deaths in Gaza between October 2023 and the time of the survey exceeded 70,000. And this was, I wrote this at the beginning of April, and I think that was from March or something. And now I think we're up to 75,000. So the targeting of medical personnel obviously has been particularly well documented, and very striking. The example that comes to mind for me every time is, there's a Guardian article on it from June 2025. Palestinian Red Crescent ambulances went missing, kind of, and some colleagues went out to go and look for them. And you can watch the video of these ambulance drivers going there, and they're going up a road, and they see the ambulances off to the side, and they get out. They're like, "Oh, what happened?" And then they just get all slaughtered by a bunch of Nazis behind a berm. So while a ceasefire was brokered in January 2025, it has been repeatedly violated, obviously, because, and it has been, Israel's violated the ceasefire hundreds of times. I'm getting all fucking excited now. I'm getting pissed. Hundreds of times between January 2025 and March 2026, including airstrikes, incursions, the imposition of new restrictions on aid, etc. And so there was an investigation, I think by Al Jazeera, into Israeli violations. And between March 2026 and January 2025, they documented at least 427 separate violations, resulting in over 1,200 Palestinian deaths, violent deaths, that is, during the ceasefire period. Now in 2026, we see the threat of large-scale ground operations by the IDF. Now the paper's not actually very accurate, because I was writing this prior to all of this, but threat of large-scale ground operations by the IDF, blah blah blah. But yeah, I think I'm gonna get off of this now. So my main point with that paper was that the UN and just the international community kind of said yes, there is a hierarchy of trauma, and regardless of all of the conflict and stuff that's been going on before in the Middle East, and all of the conflict that will arise if we do facilitate mass Jewish immigration to the state, regardless of any of that, we don't care. Jewish trauma comes above everybody else's, and we're gonna allow them to go there, and we're going to enforce that. And my point really of the paper was reform the Security Council, including the elimination or restriction of the veto power, universal jurisdiction, so kind of transformation from an international organization to more of a transnational organization, or it kind of just depends on what how I'm thinking at the moment. A commitment to equal rights, obviously, and a reckoning with trauma. And, recognizing that the Holocaust can't be used to justify any ongoing dispossession of another people. And healing requires acknowledgement, accountability, and a commitment to universal rights, not just for some, but for all. Regarding that, I think that, the Nazis and, in Germany, there was denazification, and they were forced to confront the crimes that were committed in their name. But there was never anything done for the Jews. And it was kind of just like, yep, well, you guys just got fucked. Good luck. See you later. We don't want to deal with you. It very, very strange. Very, very strange. And then essentially they just kind of weaponized that trauma to do what they're doing now and push for a greater Israel. So I want to talk about Hezbollah now and their reintroduction of supposedly of murder squads. When a lot of people in the West think of like suicide bombers, which is probably what they're going to be thinking of in terms of these murder squads, you know, they're probably thinking of them as being these extremists like ISIS or ISIS-K or the Taliban or something, and that obviously comes down to ignorance on the multiple levels. And this isn't a religious video, but whatever. ISIS and the like are, you know, Salafists, and the Taliban are Deobandi, and Hezbollah are 12ers. It's a whole nother discussion, but regarding the, you know, Hezbollah's status as 12ers, their beliefs and their formation kind of, you know, it kind of mirrors that of Israel to some degree. I'm not like, in no way am I saying that it really does, but like, if you really don't think about it, it kind of does. The 12ers have Al-Mahdi as the Messiah, and Israel, you know, Yeshua, and, you know, they're both expecting this Messiah to come and like bring about peace or whatever the fuck. And yeah, it's just an interesting dynamic in terms of, you know, the resistance and trauma, and it's kind of obviously just all very cyclical. But back on track, Westerners probably don't think of murders, you know, of World War II, or you know, they don't think of the PKK or of I don't know, the Tamil Tigers, or, you know, any of, or FARC maybe, for example, and they're thinking of probably, you know, a guy with a suicide vest on. They aren't thinking of an MTLB or, you know, a BMP loaded with explosives. And so they're probably, you know, thinking, oh, this is definitely just to, you know, a terror campaign essentially. But I know there's some discourse saying that Hezbollah is like somehow a left-wing organization and all this, and to some degree, I mean, you could say that it is, but it's bound by Islam in terms of, you know, its culture and politics and like institutions, judiciary, all that. So, you know, if we're allowing ourselves to call something left-wing even within the bounds of a religion, then sure, they could be called left-wing, but whatever. Naim Qassem, his book, Hezbollah Story from Within, is where I'm going to get this from. So he says that Islam is, and this is regarding Hezbollah obviously, Islam has built jihad on objective principles. And the most important four are these: tribulation and misinformation. Life is a continuum of ordeals and hardship. Not a day passes when a man is free from facing difficulties either with oneself, society, or with any partaker of this world. In lieu of inquiring about the reasons for such misfortunes, which represent an integral part of our creation and on which we have no influence, let us work towards using our God-given powers in order to win over our internal weaknesses and external enemies, and achieve such triumph through exertion. Let us be patient and enduring, for the results are well warranted. Obviously, these are all kind of followed up by some text, you know, saying, you know, in the name of God or whatever the fuck, but we don't need to add that, because through all of this, you don't need this religious element. If you strip back the religious element and just see it as a resistance movement, there is not, like, people will obviously still see them as terrorists and all this shit, but it's like they're chauvinists. There's Israeli and American chauvinists. There's nothing you can say to those people that will make them see sense. So 2, the path towards God. Jihad for the sake of God is the objective. Thus, he who abstains from wrongdoing is on the path towards God, and he who fights for the sake of exalting God's words above all else and executing his ordinance is on the path to God. That one I don't really, well, to me, obviously, as a non-Muslim, is not super important. But This next one, 3, man's interest. When you succeed at uprooting your enemies from your land, then that is in your interest. Where you succeed at your jihad against your demons, then that too is in your interest. When you defeat evil and work to see goodness predominate among people, then that is in your interest. And when you struggle, working to render your innermost self civil, peace can settle there, and that is also in your interest. 4, illumination. Jihad is a conduct, the results of which are only fully perceived when the rewards are counted. It opens wide the door for prosperity and achieving illumination, and is not confined to man's limited calculations, for man is incapable of understanding the secrets of the universe. And he follows this up with, or I think it might be precludes this, he says, jihad is a door towards life, not death, for uprightness is a concern of life as are pride, freeing the land, and overcoming oneself. Even martyrdom is life. Dedication to the right choices requires courage and audacity. It is thus not possible to trust in the 2 inhibitions of firm will and resolve that are borne by other disciplines. Henceforth, he says, drawing on an open letter declared by Hezbollah in 1985, henceforth we call for the implementation of the Islamic system based on direct and free choice of the people, and not through forceful imposition, as may be assumed by some. So, from all this, I guess my main point is, yes, Hezbollah is maybe reintroducing their martyr squads, but we don't need this religious element. Like he said it best, jihad is a door towards life. Martyrdom is life. You can bring about these changes that you will never see, kind of thing. It's only once you actually start counting everything up and counting all these victories will we see the prosperity that it's brought. But in the moment, in the fight, it's going to be bloody in there, but there may be regression. But death brings life, kind of thing. And in terms of, I guess, Soviets and stuff like that, they were willing, and many people around the world are willing to throw their lives away for things far beyond religion. And when there is this existential threat posed by, not posed necessarily by Israel, but posed by the idea that the international community is allowing Israel to do this, and with the United States, essentially just pointing their gun around the room, telling everybody to, accept it, there really doesn't need to be this religious aspect. I mean, so we can see that young people are all going to become martyrs one way or another. We're all fucked. So, I mean, yeah, I guess it's just a perspective thing, but let me know what you think about this fucking ramble. Bye-bye.